Good morning, 𝗠cie 𝗱𝗃𝗀𝗃𝗀𝗃𝗀𝗃𝗀𝗃𝗀𝗃𝗀𝗃𝗀𝗃𝗀𝗃 Hello, my name is Reanna Merasty. My spirit name is Blue Blanket Woman. I am Woodlands Cree from Barrenlands First Nation, which is a remote community in northern Manitoba off Reindeer Lake. I am a first-year Master of Architecture student here at the University of Manitoba, and I also hold a Bachelor of Environmental Design. I am the co-founder of the Indigenous Design and Planning Students Association, along with Naomi Ratty, if she could say hello. She's a Master of Landscape Architecture student, and as part of the formation of we're calling it IDPSA, we strive to provide more representation within the Faculty of Architecture and within the field of architecture, and to be role models and enhance Indigenous students' perception of the field and boost confidence in studying architecture. In the past, we've implemented the Cultural Awareness Session and teepee building workshop for first-year architecture students this past November, and also the Designing Pathways event organized by Naomi Ratty. And this discussion is one of many more opportunities to engage with organizations and the faculty to implement Indigenous content and initiatives. And I'd like to thank Lisa Landrum, the project lead for CAFÉ, for bringing us onto this team and for organizing this event and for supporting us.
𝗠cie 𝗍𝗃𝗍𝗃𝗍𝗃. Hello, my name is Danielle Desjarlais. I'm an AMP2 student in the Faculty of Architecture. And we're going to start today with a smudge by the Kind Heart Woman Singers. So we're going to smudge the space to start with good intentions for good discussions. And I'll leave it to Reanna to introduce the Kind Heart Woman Singers.
Yeah, the Kind Heart Women Singers, created by Raven Hart and with Ivana Yellowback, is an all-woman female singing group that sings songs in the Anishinaabe, Cree, Dakota, Lakota, and Oneida languages. And the Kind Heart Women Singers are mostly 𝗪𝗎𝗎, 𝗪𝗎𝗎𝗃, Muskego, and Anishinaabe. I've had the pleasure of working with Ivana and Raven 3 years ago, actually, at Marymount as cultural mentors, and they actually taught me my first songs and introduced me to my culture, because it's something that I didn't have the privilege of learning myself. So please take in all of their songs, because I think their voices are extremely beautiful and their energy, so I'm really grateful to have them here today.
If anybody would like to smudge, you're welcome to come up and have a smudge.
𝗍𝗍𝗲𝗍𝗍𝗍𝗍𝗍𝗍𝗍𝗍𝗍𝗍𝗍𝗍𝗍𝗍𝗍𝗍𝗍𝗍𝗍𝗍𝗍𝗍𝗍𝗍𝗍𝗍𝗍𝗍𝗍𝗍𝗍𝗍𝗍𝗍𝗍𝗍𝗍𝗍𝗍𝗍𝗍𝗍𝗍𝗍𝗍𝗍𝗍𝗍𝗍𝗍𝗍𝗍𝗍𝗍𝗍𝗍𝗍𝗍𝗍𝗍𝗍𝗍𝗍𝗍𝗍𝗍𝗍𝗍𝗍𝗍𝗍𝗍𝗍𝗍𝗍𝗍𝗍𝗍𝗍 a good way. I'm just going to speak a little bit about CAFÉ and Nation to Nation. Thank you, guys. Oh, right. I'm going to hand it off to Lisa. Okay. CAFÉ process aims for meaningful dialogue with Indigenous people to gain knowledge of their cultural values, to help sustain their self-determined practices and design principles, and to develop better informed and more effective policies and programs for Canadians. Indigenous rights, values, and design principles are foundational priorities underpinning and traversing the four discursive themes: place, people, protection, and relationship. This nation-to-nation conversation helps ensure that Indigenous perspectives meaningfully shape Canada's architectural future.
Thank you, Danielle and Reanna, for starting this off and for your beautiful suggestions and organization of this morning's conversation. Can we give Reanna and Danielle our gratitude? So my name is Lisa Landrum, and I'm a professor in the Department of Architecture. I'm also Associate Dean of the Faculty of Architecture here at the University of Manitoba. And before we begin the panel conversation, I would like to acknowledge that the University of Manitoba campuses are located on the original lands of the Anishinaabe, Cree, 𝗤𝗎𝗄𝗎𝗄𝗎, Dakota, and Dene peoples, and on the homeland of the Metis Nation. We respect the treaties that were made on these territories. We acknowledge the harms and mistakes of the past, and we dedicate ourselves to move forward in partnership with Indigenous communities in a spirit of reconciliation and collaboration. So, and in the spirit of reconciliation, if you'll permit me just 2 more minutes, I would like to make a couple reflections. The first is a bit of a personal reflection. You know, we often give these traditional territories acknowledgements at the beginning of events in our institutions, and for many of us who are not from these territories, it gives us a time to reflect on the territories that we did come from. So I grew up in a small community about 60 miles north of Toronto on a street named Mississauga Street, which is associated with the fishing paths of the Anishinaabe-speaking Mississaugas First Nations. And Mississauga Street led to a long, narrow lake named Lake 𝗪𝗪𝗓𝗓𝗓, the Lake of Many Winds. And Lake 𝗪𝗪𝗓𝗓𝗓 joins Lake Simcoe at a very special watering place known as the Narrows. And at this location, one finds 5,000-year-old fishing weirs. To my knowledge, it's one of the oldest extant archaeological sites of fishing weirs in North America. It's a very clever wooden fence to responsibly herd and catch fish. And it's now cared for by the Chippewas of the Majiniking First Nation in Rama. So like many Canadians, I think, of non-Indigenous backgrounds, we grow up ignorant of these facts of the land that we occupy and which nurture us. So I just want to thank profoundly our students and the University of Manitoba for giving people like me the opportunity to reflect on where we come from and how we can meaningfully take strides towards reconciliation. So the second comment I'd like to offer is on the issues of policy, which Reanna and Danielle started to discuss. We'll get into this more in the afternoon with the CAFÉ consultations. But I'll say, you know, from the beginning, there's been a working group of individuals looking to mobilize an architecture policy for Canada. And early on, we have benefited from input from many members of the REIC Indigenous Task Force, including David Fortin, who's with us virtually from Sudbury. and also 𝗤𝗍𝗂𝗲𝗄𝗏, who provided some very detailed comments which are reflected on the resource section of the CAFÉ website. So we're grateful for those comments and guidance, and there's a lot more work that we need to do, and this is one further step in that work. The other point with the architecture policy is we've been discussing it as a national architecture policy, and many nations, particularly in Europe, have such policies. But in Canada, this presents a very unique challenge for us, I think, but also a very special opportunity. We are a nation of many nations. So what does it mean to have a national architecture policy in a nation which has many First Nations? And is that the correct nomenclature? Should we be discussing it in different terms? So I'm not sure that we will answer all of these questions this morning, today, this year, or even in our generation. But I really welcome the opportunity, and thank you again for all of the suggestions to make this happen. All right, so that's enough from me, and now we're going back to commence the panel.
So I think I'm going to introduce David.
Yeah, do you want everyone to sit at the front first? Or?
No, they're going to sit so they can
Okay.
watch them.
I see, okay.
So I guess at this moment we're going to introduce the 7 presenters, each before they present, and then afterwards there's going to be a panel, a moderated panel discussion up here, and then afterwards to open it up to the audience for more discussion and questions afterwards. So the first presenter unfortunately couldn't make it here physically. David is from the Laurentian University in Sudbury, Ontario. Unfortunately, the fight got canceled yesterday, and David is Métis, born and raised throughout Alberta and Saskatchewan. He is an associate professor and director at the McEwen School of Architecture at Laurentian University in Ontario. At the McEwen School of Architecture, David has taught various studios, including the Graduate Indigenous Design Studio, and developed an introductory building science course emphasizing the impact of climate change in architectural thinking. David is a member of the Métis Nation of Ontario and the Royal Architecture Institute of Canada Indigenous Task Force member that seeks ways to foster and promote Indigenous design in Canada.
Great, thank you. All right, this microphone is working, and David, do you want to just say a couple words to see that we have good sound?
Yeah, check, 2, 3.
That's pretty good. Try again.
Hello?
Yep, that's good. Okay, you are audible and visible.
Okay. Okay, 𝗠cie everybody. Good morning. Thank you to the organizing group. I'm sorry I'm not there. I was looking forward to my warm winter vacation to Winnipeg, but I guess I'm stuck here. I also want to say, just before I get started, I'm speaking to you from the traditional territories of the 𝗤𝗏𝗡𝗏𝗃 Anishinaabe people here in Sudbury, so I want to honor that as you are there. Okay, so I've got 5 minutes, and so I'm really going to try to today just give you a very quick snapshot of basically the school that I'm the director of currently, and an approach to architecture focused mainly on education of architects and the potential for that. And these 3 words I think are really important for this. So the idea of relationships, reciprocity, and respect through architecture. And this is an image from a studio that I taught a few years ago working with 𝗣𝗏𝗀𝗏𝗃 First Nation. And I'm going to just dwell on this and then rip a bunch of slides after to kind of explain further. But you know, there's kind of a thirst in our field to always be looking for the new interesting or innovative thing, and really what we try to do is deflect that idea that indigeneity is a visual or a style that people should get excited about. That first of all, architecture is about building relationships with people, and not just people, but relationships with the land. And secondly, that there should be a level of reciprocity in whatever we do and whatever we engage with communities, that Indigenous people should benefit from that engagement. This is not simply an exercise of designers or academics landing and taking, because there's been a lot of stuff taken over the years. And lastly, respecting, again, people and land, and that for all people, and to kind of architecture with dignity and kindness. The next slide, when the school was formed in the late 2000s, one of the things that had already started with conversation with our Indigenous people, and so there was a report basically based on these conversations about what architecture should be, and you can see the quote that was pulled out of there that, you know, at that time this group was deciding that architecture and design was the area where the least progress had been made in terms of relationships to Indigenous people. Next slide. Out of those conversations where these, you know, you've seen these before, where we had, they had an artist come and summarize these, and there were 3 sheets of these, basically was questioning what a School of Architecture could provide to our Indigenous communities and how values could be reflected within an education. And we keep these still in our building, so this is hung in our main office still to this day, something to reflect on and look back on. And going to the next slide, one of the unique aspects that really drew me here was to think about a curriculum where indigeneity was not treated as an isolated one course taught by one Indigenous person, that Indigenous topics would be considered throughout our entire curriculum. So that's sort of where that stood in terms of Indigenous content in our undergraduate curriculum over the 4 years. Slide. We also, this isn't me, this is before my time, but the university saw the value in having Indigenous elders and knowledge carriers in the school, and they're not voluntary positions. These are paid teachers. Elders are paid to be here with us, and they guide students and faculty. Next slide. From day one, the traditional artifact is a teaching tool about thinking about the world. So, you know, people would question why we go back thousands of years. Architects do innovative things, and we feel that the birch bark canoe, for instance, is a tremendously innovative artifact and embodies so many teachings about the world. Next slide. And within that, we work with our local communities. And so, for instance, we gift the canoes. We have ceremony with those canoes. We put them in the water, we birth them, they have names, and these become important teaching tools. Next slide. When students are taught structure, the first thing they learn are birds' nests and natural systems, and then think about our local building technologies here. So looking at the wigwam and bentwood structures, and then working with instructors like 𝗤𝗄𝗃𝗃𝗃 on how that can scale up to architectural interventions as you're learning about architecture. Next slide. Working with communities, we held, for instance, the Walking with Our Sisters ceremony in our school, and this slide is part of that, but I just want to show this, the signage behind these young ladies, that we were the first school in our campus that had the foresight to have the Anishinaabe language on every sign in our building, whether it be a bathroom or janitor room. So the language is reflected throughout the entire school and now the campus. Next slide. And just the idea that the school itself transformed into a sacred space for this ceremony. So 𝗤𝗄𝗃𝗃𝗃𝗃 and a lot of the women of our community came together here to change actual design space into a ceremony space, which was quite. Next slides. So these are just some examples of some of the studios we've done. This is a graduate studio. We work up in the North James Bay. This is 𝗤𝗄𝗃𝗃𝗃𝗃, went to the Moosonee area where we're forging long-term relationships with these communities. Next slide. Also trying to be mindful that there are generational approaches to design. So using within communities, things like Minecraft for the youth and also traditional forms with the elders. Next slide. We also are working in northern Quebec with the Innu communities. So similarly, spending time in community, getting to know people. This one was working with some children. Next slide. To build play structures with these communities, again, giving back to the community from the conversation. Next slides. And teaching the students that design studio isn't about being at your desk and drawing. It's about listening to elders, about eating, sharing meals. We spend a lot of time doing these things in these studios. Slide. And then the conventional kind of architectural engagement. So looking at programming and environmental analysis with community. Next slide. And just an example of land-based teachings and spending time in the land with communities, visiting sacred sites, understanding how important the land is, and embedding that in the design process is critical. Next slide. And this is an example of the studio, the kind of projects that are coming out. This is a site model that was made of birch bark because that was an important material for the community. And then this model is being gifted back to the community again. So thinking about the design of even the site model for the studio is the foresight of where it's going to go in its afterlife and how it can give back to the people. Next slide. And this is just the last slide. I know I've got a minute over already. I apologize. Just showing that what I think that our school has done and now what the University of Manitoba is doing is creating space for Indigenous people to talk about architecture. It used to always be there'd be one Indigenous person at the table trying to represent all Indigenous people. This is a review from my studio where we had Aledia and Patrick Stewart and Chris Cornelius and Jake. And here you had Indigenous people debating what was Indigenous and what was tacky and was not. And there needs to be a space for Indigenous people to understand what a future of architecture is. And that's why I'm so excited to hear our youth and the leaders of this conference here today to share their thoughts, because this is really the future of our nations across the countries. I'll stop there. Marcy, thank you.
Thank you, David. Our next presenter is Ryan Gorrie. And Ryan, feel free to stand up there, come up here, whatever is most comfortable. Ryan is Anishinaabe and is a member of, I'll let Ryan pronounce that, Sandpoint First Nation on Lake Nipissing in Ontario. Currently a senior associate and architect at Brook McIlroy and the lead of their Indigenous design studio. Ryan played a key role as a designer and an artist of the multi-award-winning Spirit Garden on the waterfront in Thunder Bay, Ontario. Ryan is also a member of the RAIC Indigenous Task Force.
Bonjour, Ryan Gorrie, Indigenous. Nimiki wikwe dongan donji, Danoki Oma, Winnipeg, Treaty 1. I'm originally from Thunder Bay and work here in Treaty 1 for Brook McIlroy, as was mentioned. My community is called Bingwiniasha Anishinaabe on Lake Nipissing. The title of my talk, and I often begin this way, is 𝗣𝗲𝗶𝘀𝗀𝗃. After reading some work by Leanne Simpson, this term popped out at me, a way of looking back to move forward. And on the left is our great-great-great-grandmother, and on the right is Nitanis Wasea. Sorry, it's on a timer here. And it's just our way of, or my way of looking at work, what's important, how we bring the past forward, and what does the future look like, and how do we keep that in our hearts and our minds while we're doing this. So I'll walk through a few projects that we have done and how they've, in my opinion, represent this concept. This is a Huron-Wendat longhouse at Crawford Lake near Guelph. It sees over 70,000 students a year. It's an active archaeological site. So on the outside, a traditional longhouse. On the inside, modern space for meeting, gathering, and features a series of rooms. On the right, this circle space has both active elements as well as archaeological elements. And you can't see it on the slide, but in the ceiling there's an aperture that represents Sky Woman coming to the earth, and on the ground is a turtle. So creation is present in that room. At Humber College, in working with Dave Thomas, Cheyenne's dad, we worked on a series of Indigenous cultural markers in looking at how we depict the stories that were shared with us by the elders. So looking at, in this case, the Anishinaabe life path. And this is in the Barrett Center for Technology. So there are seven forms on the element itself, representing the 7 stages of life as were shared with us, and it's linked by this center spirit piece. And it has incorporated elements of shelter, of food, of culture, of our clan system. And the zigzag pattern that goes up the front that faces east is that representation of the life path. and it's programmable, so the college can change the color, change the speed. It has a built-in sound system. And a shout out to Wood Anchor, who actually built this. They're from here. Another cultural marker site at Humber College Lakeshore. So we had a structure that was influenced by the sweat lodge structure, so the altar and the structure itself. There are 7 markers around this site that talk about the Carrying Place Trail, which is an important route that linked on Lake Ontario to Lake Simcoe, and has significant points along the way that are represented both in pattern but also in the language. At the Welcome Center, which is not far from there, we depicted our story of the migration. So we started out in the east, we moved west to where we are now as Anishinaabe people into Manitoba, Saskatchewan, Alberta, and so our territory is vast and we are everywhere. This is a shot from above looking at, there are 7 stopping points in the original story, and but we wanted to spread that out. We wanted to say that it's more than just those territories, we're beyond. So a person approaching the Welcome Center can walk that path every day and be part of their everyday experience. As well, the elders shared with us that the clan system is important for us to show because it represents our relationship to one another, to the land, and how we organize ourselves. So the clan symbols, whether there are many clans beyond these are 7 original clans. Some say there are 5, but these are the ones that the elders had asked us to include, and they're depicted both in symbol and the language, as well as the interrelationships of those clans. At Algonquin College, we, alongside Diamond Schmidt Architects, developed Indigenous Student Commons, which is open to everyone, but had this particular courtyard in mind where the first sacred fire on campus actually took place here, and at the gathering circle at the center is right where we had that first fire. So the Student Commons has the green roof, and the runoff from that roof comes down the column, makes its way down the stairs, and circles around the gathering structure to form a seasonal rain garden. And those weirs that Lisa was talking about, the structure is inspired by some of those weir fences that were shared with us in community. At Collingwood, at Waterfront, we, in working with an elder named Duke Redbird, our studio developed this gathering structure where it was important to depict the 7 grandfather teachings. So you'll see those teachings are depicted on the platforms at the base, but they also relate to the 7 platforms above, and our designers worked on creating unique patterning that represents the 7 layers of the forest, the food forest. And this is just a shot of opening day. And here's where it all began for me in Thunder Bay at the Spirit Garden. Before I was a graduate here, I was asked to be part of the team to design this space. And it's incredibly impactful for me to have that kind of influence on my home community, to bring our designs to the forefront, for it to be part of everybody's everyday experience, and to be able to have the creativity within that to share, to learn, and just going back to Humber College, took the kids there in the summertime, and they naturally took their shoes off to walk the path. So it was really special moment for me. And yeah, miigwech 𝗍𝗿𝗍𝗍𝗍𝗍𝗍𝗍𝗍𝗍𝗍𝗍𝗍𝗍𝗍𝗍𝗍𝗍𝗍𝗍𝗍𝗍𝗍𝗍𝗍𝗍𝗍𝗍𝗍𝗍𝗍𝗍𝗍𝗍𝗍𝗍𝗍𝗍𝗍𝗍𝗍𝗍𝗍𝗍𝗍𝗍𝗍𝗍𝗍𝗍𝗍𝗍𝗍𝗍𝗍𝗍𝗍𝗍𝗍𝗍𝗍𝗍𝗍𝗍𝗍𝗍𝗍𝗍𝗍𝗍𝗍𝗍𝗍𝗍𝗍𝗍𝗍𝗍𝗍𝗍𝗍𝗍𝗍𝗍𝗍𝗍𝗍𝗍𝗍𝗍𝗍𝗍𝗍𝗍𝗍
Thank you so much, Ryan. For the next speaker, we have Roxanne Greene. Roxanne Greene is an Anishinaabe and the Councillor of Shoal 40 in Ontario, and the community is at the borders of Manitoba and Ontario. She has been part of the numerous collaborations and initiatives within the Faculty of Architecture, such as the Design Build with Shoal 40, collaborating with Sean Bailey.
Thank you, Reanna. Thank you so much. So before I start talking to some of the slides that we have here, I just want to ask, because I know some of the people in the room are new about the Shoal 40 story. If how many of you guys know about the Shoal Lake story? Okay, so that's about half the room. That's pretty good. So 𝗍𝗲𝗀𝗃𝗀𝗃 is right on the border of the Manitoba and Ontario border. And at one time, our land base was on the Manitoba side of the border, and it was good, pristine lands there. So what happened was over time, we got pushed and pushed and pushed onto the further side of Ontario side of the border, and we were turned into an island so that the city of Winnipeg can get their clean drinking water. So 100 years later, we still don't have clean drinking water, but we do now have road access as of last year. So all those years, I've been an advocate since my early 20s. I'm 40 now, and I'm actually here to see the realization of Freedom Road. So now that we have Freedom Road, things have been moving rather quickly. We've got so many projects on the go. And I want to acknowledge U of M staff here, engineering and architecture departments, for helping us get to where we want to go on some of the projects. For example, we had partnership with Sean Bailey's classes, and one of the good things, well, there's a couple really great outcomes that we've had lately, but I just wanted to share with everyone now that because of Sean's classes that he's had, I know some of the girls here were a part of doing the 𝗣𝗲𝗀𝗀𝗀 designs, and I've come here a couple times myself for the reviews of that process. Well, we were finally approved for 𝗣𝗲𝗀𝗀𝗀 design, and we've taken those 𝗣𝗲𝗀𝗀𝗀 designs and we've showed them to the community members. And for me, my background is Aboriginal governance, and also I'm a trained facilitator. So for me, community engagement is key. No matter what project that we work on, we need to involve the community in any decision process, any projects. That's huge. And I don't see overall success unless you have that. So that's super huge. So we took the designs, while going back to when Sean was working, and then we had the class come out a whole bunch of times, and we'd have our community members get involved and meet them, and I would get staff take turns to show them around, and pretty much they were like familiar faces in the community after a while. So everyone knows Sean Bailey now, and so now that we've shown those designs to the community members, we have a couple designs that are going to be out there for requests for proposals. So there are two designs that were really favored by the community members. So we see a combination of those two designs. And I was just telling Sean this morning that I just got the final draft of it. So, and I don't know which ones or which students did them. So Sean will be able to share the information with the students, and I see a couple of people here that also may place a quote for the design, so that's pretty huge for us back home. And one of the important things here is the protocol. So when we talk about, I've heard this term before, I don't know if you guys use it here, indigenizing the curriculum in architecture or in engineering, whichever programs that you want to apply it to, but moving forward, I'm really glad that U of M is taking this initiative to really understand and promote and to respect that process, because for us that's huge as Anishinaabe people. So when we have new projects, you have that dialogue with that community that you're working with, and you follow that protocol that they're accustomed to, whether it's asking them first, offering tobacco, whether it's if you sit in a ceremony or if it's something that an elder dreams on. For example, when we started the picnic project, the picnic feasting area with 𝗍𝗲𝗀𝗀𝗀𝗀, the elder said, okay, I have to go to ceremony and I'll let you know. And I'm like, oh my gosh, I was so nervous. Like, is this project gonna happen? But he came back the next day and he's, yep, this is gonna happen. Okay, so it was really neat to, really wishing that project would happen, because it's a common space for everyone to use, and also designed with some of the members and the students based on their visits and their research in the community. And yes, I just wanted to, emphasize on the protocol and the process, respecting the community, working with them, involving them with any decision and the designs in partnership with that community. And for us in Shoal Lake 40, our partnerships with U of M has proven to be successful, and it's excellent. And we're in the area of reconciliation right now, so that's huge. So I applaud U of M for reaching out to the First Nation communities and finding ways to work together. So I'm just going to speak to a few of these slides here. So this is the first week of Freedom Road celebration, and I'm a counselor, but I wear many hats. And I project manage the whole 4-day celebration event. I'm also an event planner. This is during the powwow day where the students came out and showed the members the designs. It was a really special day, and they got to talk to so many people that day and get some valuable input from the members. This is, I don't know which day, oh yeah, this must be like day 3 or something of construction. But when the construction actually began, it was really exciting. And I just want to go back to where the elders talk about your project, because Sean and his class kind of envisioned the picnic feasting area facing a certain way, but the elders said, no, it has to face this way for certain reasons, right? They face from west to east, and it's almost like when the sun rises, it's almost like Creator saying, hello, everyone. And this is a spot here. I'm just gonna, so further down to the north side here, there's a little area just around the corner where the last really traditional people lived in the community. And it's considered a sacred spot. So we were kind of worried if we would even get the blessing from the elders to build there because of that. But yeah, we were given the go-ahead, we were given the blessing. So as a result, we offered tobacco to that family of the people that last lived there, and that feasting area will be named in honor of that family that lived there, that last practiced our old traditional ways. This is just one beautiful evening here. We had one lead carpenter and about four or five youth in the community that helped build this project. And it was a real learning experience for them because some of them had very minor experience in carpentry. And they also did the concrete, the pour for it. So that was also exciting. We also contracted a guy from PCL who is from Dog Creek First Nation. So we tried to keep it as Indian as we could. This is one night of bonfire. We sat with them, spent time with the students they were so hungry to learn. So we'd sit there and they would ask questions or we would tell stories and we just learned off each other. It was a real beautiful experience. Okay, and that's the last slide. Thank you, miigwech.
Thank you so much, Roxanne. Our next presenter is 𝗣𝗲𝗀𝗀𝗃. He is from Gitxsan Nation of the Northwest Interior, British Columbia, Canada. He is an author and artist of numerous award-winning children's books, such as 𝗪𝗪 Sockeye Mother and the Grizzly Mother. Brett has worked in the film and television industry and is a volunteer board member for such organizations as 𝗪𝗪𝗃𝗃 and 𝗪𝗪𝗃𝗃𝗃 Festival. He also works with the Prairie Climate Center at the University of Winnipeg.
𝗪𝗪𝗃𝗃𝗃. That's how we say good morning. Simgiget, Siganamhanach, 𝗠𝗪𝗃𝗃𝗀𝗀𝗃. 𝗣𝗵𝗲𝗀𝗃𝗃𝗃 lach sintichwid so we will good gunuch will suetwi. Troisidnism will buxum. My name is 𝗣𝗵𝗃𝗃𝗃. My government name is 𝗣𝗃𝗀𝗀𝗃𝗃. I am from the Northwest Interior, British Columbia. Our territory is 𝗠cie𝗱𝗲𝗿𝘁𝗀𝗏, which is the Caribou Ravine. And my house group is the White Owl, and my clan is the Fireweed. So where I come from in BC, we still live a very traditional and very cultural lifestyle. Even though we do have band offices, we are still using our hereditary system to govern our territories. So a lot of people may have heard about our territories in the news recently. Our allies to the south of us, the 𝗣𝗿𝗀𝗀𝗏𝗃, my Auntie Frida's camp, that is us exercising our laws. We never ever ceded any of those territories. Because the reason we protect that territory is because of the land itself. It's the very thing that created our language. The land is the very thing that created our art. It literally shaped who we are. The 𝗤𝗏𝗃𝗃 people just didn't all of a sudden start building longhouses and carving totem poles just for the heck of it. It's thousands of years of existence living on that land. And we've always protected that land. So many places tend to do land acknowledgements, and a lot of people view it from the perspective that it's a political statement. But land acknowledgement is an understanding. When you come into someone's territory, you're acknowledging everything that has been born of that territory. You're acknowledging the culture, the food, the language, everything that comes from it. When you're born to a land, our people have what's called 𝗤𝗏𝗃𝗃𝗃𝗃𝗃𝗃𝗃𝗃𝗃𝗃𝗃𝗃𝗃𝗃𝗃𝗃𝗃𝗃𝗃𝗃𝗃𝗃𝗃𝗃𝗃𝗃𝗃𝗃𝗃𝗃𝗃𝗃𝗃𝗃𝗃𝗃𝗃𝗃𝗃𝗃𝗃𝗃𝗃𝗃𝗃𝗃𝗃𝗃𝗃𝗃𝗃𝗃𝗃𝗃𝗃𝗃𝗃𝗃𝗃𝗃𝗃𝗃𝗃𝗃𝗃𝗃𝗃𝗃𝗃𝗃𝗃𝗃𝗃𝗃𝗃𝗃𝗃𝗃𝗃𝗃𝗃𝗃𝗃𝗃𝗃𝗃𝗃𝗃𝗃𝗃𝗃𝗃𝗃 you take responsibility for once you are born in the place of your home. You have a responsibility to protect that land because that land is what keeps you alive. It is literally the only thing that keeps you alive. You can talk about economy, you can talk about growth, whatever you want. None of that gives you air. None of that gives you water. None of that gives you life at all. It only gives life because you're oppressed in a system where you require money to live. So we protect our land because it means everything to us. Because when everything is gone, we'll still be able to be us. So it shapes us in everything that we do. So my people, we are part of an ecosystem. We view ourselves as being just as much a part of where we live as the rest of the animals and plants are. We don't view ourselves as being above or beyond anything. When we look at our territory, we make sure that we know where we're going to place our homes, that it's going to be viable for the next however long the river's going to follow that waterway. For thousands of years living in those ecosystems, we begin to develop different things like aquaculture, fisheries, our harvesting practices. All of those things allowed our people to be sedentary. That gave us time to talk about philosophy, art, governance. We developed those things over time. And part of that development and what pushed us forward is our form of architecture. When we created the longhouses, they were purpose-built. They were places that you could build because you know you're going to be there for a while. The interior of the homes, the walls were made out of our bentwood boxes, which are the storage units. So those storage units are your walls. You can move them depending on who's coming in and out of the house. Your family units get each of those little spaces divided by the bentwood boxes. And also the structures of the roof, they were made so that you can open and close, to create a draft through the building to get fresh air through, depending on what the weather was like. Everything about those longhouses were purpose-built. And cedar became the protector for our people. Cedar was something that we valued dearly. We shaped it, we manipulated it, into everything: clothing, artwork, buildings. It's a very malleable fiber. It's rot resistant. You can make amazing waterproof cloaks out of cedar. And we always say that we're born onto a cedar mat and we'll leave this life in a cedar box. And the cedar was incredibly integral to how we lived. It allowed us to live the way that we lived. And all of those things have direct influence on how we build things. So what does all of this kind of play with what we want to do going forward? Well, one of the things that we always practiced is giving back 10 times more than we take. We learned that from all the species that live within our territory. We talk about raven being one of our accidental creators, but there's always truth behind all of our stories. The mythologies of the Indigenous peoples all carry truths. So when we talk about raven, as some of you may know, blackbirds are hoarders. They'll get seeds and they start to plant them because they're just trying to keep them for the winter months. But blackbirds will forget like 80% of what they buried. So they accidentally create new growth and diversity. So we told stories of the raven and how smart they were and how they could talk, because they can talk. People don't know they actually can formulate vocals more than parrots. Edgar Allan Poe even talked about it, Nevermore, if anyone's ever read that. Those are the things that we talk about in our histories. So we learned to give back, because the only way that you ensure your future for your grandchildren, and we look into the future, we don't look at now. Looking at now is just going to benefit you, and you're going to kick your kids in the ass and tell them that they're not worth it. You have to look forward. You have to. So all of this kind of plays into what do we look at when it comes to developing new designs? What do we look at when it comes to developing new ideas, structures? Maybe we have to look at what is building something going to do to another piece of land where the material comes from. So yeah, we're going to build a new structure, but most people don't care where the material comes from. And then they just leave a giant gap from wherever they took from. They just leave massive holes, not giving back to continue on a life cycle. So we have to start to think, what can we do with our materials? Instead of maybe creating whole new structures, how can we redesign old structures and maybe redefine them? How can we change them to adapt to our changing climate? Our people have lived on our territories since time immemorial. And if you want to get technical about it, it's been over 15,000 years. It's the evidence that we have on our territory. We've been through the climate changes, the natural climate changes, but we've never been through anything that's happening right now. The short amount of time in which everything is changing is rapidly changing our way of life. It's threatening the very existence of my people. So we are very defensive of that territory. We are very defensive of that land. So if we are creating new structures, we should think about designs that can start to adapt to a territory. If we're looking at homes, for instance, we're going to have to start to think of building homes at a higher level with the rising waters. We're going to have to think of homes near riverways not being permanent. Can they be moved? Because riverways naturally changed. Urban centers, we tend to build permanent structures and we try to change the land for our own benefit. But that actually takes away from the cycle, the natural cycles of the land. Our longhouses used to be built in places where we knew certain floodplains weren't going to reach for a while, but as soon as our land experts and our elders would say, okay, we got to start to look at moving it, we have to move the whole village. So it's easy to take apart a longhouse. We built them with cedar planks. Cedar is very straight grain wood, so it's easy to plank. And we didn't use nails to put everything together. So it was very easy to kind of take apart and rebuild. So looking at those kind of structures, and also, what are we going to do when there are hot days? Where I work right now, with the Prairie Climate Center, we created the tool called the Climate Atlas. Some of the students here are very familiar with it, as well as some of the teachers. We've been working with them. They got to utilize the tool and take into consideration what are we going to plan for in the future. So what this tool is, it allows you to see how many 30-plus degree weather days are going to be in a certain area. So in the summertime or the wintertime, how much are we going to be warming in the near future? And all of that is based off of existing models and data from scientists all over the world. So it's all very relevant, it's all very user-friendly, but I also want people here to kind of take a look at that site and maybe contact me and say, this is kind of missing. As an architect, I would really love to see this, or as a designer, it would be great if I could utilize this tool in this method, however that may be. Because, you know, we tend to look at creating zero carbon buildings or following zero carbon rules and codes wherever we design, but we're beyond that. We're beyond trying to be zero carbon. It's time to adapt. And this isn't just a prediction, it's happening right now. Where I'm from in the Pacific Northwest, it's warming 5 times faster in the winter than anywhere else on the planet. And I see the difference in our territory. The glaciers like this one here where my son is standing, that glacier, and this is in August, used to be halfway to the lake in August. In the wintertime, it would come right to where he's standing. This glacier is almost gone. This is fresh water. We have some of the only remaining freshwater stores in Canada. And that's pretty scary. There's a lot of communities in BC who are going through water advisories, water droughts, and they have to watch how much they're using. And major urban centers are sucking up so much of those resources because we aren't adapting. So this is a time where we need to look at adapting. Vancouver is doing a really good job with regards to modeling and designing for an urban area. They're looking at how they can restructure their infrastructure to benefit the local ecosystems. They've cleaned out salmon spawning grounds so that they could return, and they haven't been there for like 100 years. So they're trying to develop a way that the city can benefit the ecosystem. So I think going forward, that's kind of what I would like to impart, is thinking of a new way of design, thinking of a new way in how we impact what we do, because it's relevant to every field of work. We're just in a state of change. And our people have gone through it before, so Indigenous people have a very close knowledge of adaptation. I mean, we've adapted to this 150 years of change and colonization. And I'm still here, I still speak my language, I still know my art. So we adapt. We didn't assimilate, we adapted. So we aren't a past tense. We are forever going to be 𝗣𝗍𝗄𝗏. So I'd just like to leave that and, just to kind of look at that glacier and think about that. And then hopefully you have new ideas coming forward. Because some of the students that I've worked with here already have some amazing ideas. They have some amazing insights. And I'd like to see everyone kind of look forward in that direction. Thank you.
Thank you, Brett. So up next, we have Amina Lalor. Amina is Métis, Irish, and Vietnamese graduate student at the University of Waterloo School of Architecture, where she was one of the 3 co-founders of the student initiatives Treaty Land Global Stories. Her research explores the meaning of practicing architecture in good relation on Indigenous lands within settler colonial context. She is currently the research assistant and project coordinator for Nichol's House, a proposed Indigenous land-based research hub by Indigenous scholars Kim Anderson, Sherry Longbord, and Brittany Labai at the University of Guelph.
Thank you so much, Reanna. 𝗠cie, hello.
As Reanna mentioned, my name is Amina, and I'm a Métis Irish and Vietnamese master's student at the Waterloo School of Architecture in Cambridge, Ontario. I feel truly honored to be part of this discussion. It's really important and urgent. And I'm also particularly grateful to be here on the Red River. My great-great-grandfather grew up on a homestead just about 5 kilometers north of here. And my grandmother, she also grew up here in Winnipeg before her, and my grandfather moved east. That's my grandmother on the Red River. And they ended up in Toronto, and that's where I was born and where I grew up, just north of Toronto, close to the Don River, where salmon still run. Most of my academic life thus far, I've spent on the banks of the Grand River in Cambridge, Ontario. There, we sit on the ancestral lands of the Neutral, the Anishinaabe, and the Haudenosaunee peoples, as well as on the Haldimand Tract, land promised to the Haudenosaunee, or Six Nations. The Haudenosaunee begin group meetings, as some of you may know, with the 𝗣𝗲𝗀𝗀𝗀𝗀𝗀, meaning the words that come before all else, also known as the Thanksgiving address. A typical address usually offers gratitude to the people, our families, our communities, the earth, our mother, the waters, the fish and other water dwellers, the plants, the roots, the medicines, the harvested foods that sustain us, corn, beans, and squash, the fruits, the animals, the trees, the birds, the insects, the thunder beings, the 4 winds, our elder brother, the sun, grandmother moon, the stars, and the creator or life force behind all that sustains us. After each item is acknowledged and at the end of the address, the speaker says, "Let our minds be one," reminding the group to collectively hold that gratitude in mind as they carry out their purpose for the day. Learning from those whose lands I live and work on, in order to engage meaningfully in strengthening nation-to-nation relations, in truth and reconciliation, and decolonization efforts, I think that within the architectural community, we must first collectively re-ground ourselves in the land that we all depend on. Of course, here in this place we call Canada, no matter where we are on Indigenous lands. Canada was formed by an orchestrated attempt to erase Indigenous peoples from their territories through genocidal dispossession, displacement, and assimilation. Wherever we build here on Turtle Island, this is part of our context. The land carries this story. In a recent article titled "No Design on Stolen Land," the authors observed that, quote, "every single building site, from a house to a highway, benefits from the exploitation of a capitalist property regime built on the back of broken treaties. These sites are not only taken from stolen lands and unceded territories, they are the spatial products of a violent structure and system of settler colonialism that displaced and continues to dispossess Indigenous peoples through 500 years of territorial injustices." Spatial designers have been key players in the parceling of private property, defining the boundaries of reserves, building residential schools, and of course creating the urban metropolises that uphold settler colonial power. Borrowing the words of planning theorist Libby Porter, I think that if we work to recognize and unlearn the colonial cultures that frame standard architectural practice, maybe we can start to combat structural violence that we're complicit in and recalibrate our relationship to the land. Architectural practice, in my mind, is inherently land-based. Buildings usually have a very direct physical connection to the earth. They're composed of materials sourced from the land, processed to varying degrees of recognition. They circulate energy generated from the combustion of earthly materials or through the harnessing of natural forces. Streams of water flow through our floors and walls, feeding our taps. Architects have the privilege of orchestrating the union of earthly materials into something beautiful, or so we hope, that ultimately serves to mediate human relationships with the environment, with land. Maybe all of this is obvious, but it's easy to forget. It's easy to forget about our participation in the large-scale movement of materials comprising the extraction industry, an industry that continues to this day, as we speak, to be responsible for environmental degradation and the dispossession of Indigenous peoples from their territories. Amidst an escalating climate crisis and ongoing violence towards the original caretakers of these lands, maybe framing architecture as a land-based practice will help center our minds and hearts on what's important as we combat settler colonial violence and learn what it means to practice architecture in good relation with the land, waters, plants, animals, and each other. I'm just ending this presentation with a slide that shows a project that I'm currently involved with called 𝗠់𝗱𝗲𝗄𝗏, as Reanna mentioned, with Kim Anderson, Sherry Longboat, and Brittany Luby at the University of Guelph. And it's exciting because we're actively trying to create an Indigenous kind of decolonial space within an institution. And of course, that comes with a lot of bureaucracy and red tape, but it's exciting because we're working with community to build essentially an Indigenous research hub that's centered on kitchen table methodologies, land-based practices, and it'll have very direct access to ceremonial grounds and possibility for future land-based research. And maybe I can talk more about it in the panel discussion, but I think there's hope, or at least I try to stay hopeful, so thank you.
So our next presenter is Nicole Luke. She's an urban Inuk born in Yellowknife, but with family residing in the 𝗣𝗍𝗲𝗀𝗃 region of Nunavut. She has been living in Winnipeg for most of her life and recently graduated from the environmental design program at the University of Manitoba last spring and is now in her first year of the master's program in the Department of Architecture. She is passionate about culture, design, and community and is a member of the exhibition design team for the Inuit Art Center.
All right. Hello, my name's Nicole Luke. Hi, David. We finally meet again. David and I met purely over video conferences, and I was excited to meet him in person, but clearly he's not here, and I'm starting to think he's a simulation. Just kidding. So my name is Nicole Luke. I'm Inuk, and I was born in Yellowknife, Northwest Territories, but only because it was the closest birthing hospital to Chesterfield Inlet, Nunavut, where my family lived at the time. My parents later moved us to Yellowknife, Northwest Territories, Dauphin, Manitoba, and now currently where I live is Winnipeg, Manitoba, and this is due to job opportunities and access to greater education for my brothers and I. So on the left here, that's Chester, and on the right, that's Rankin, which is one of the larger communities. So just out of curiosity, is anyone here Inuk or from the territories? So I will just keep that in mind. I'm here to discuss why I'm here today and how I found myself up here and in the Faculty of Architecture pursuing my master's degree and possibly the only Inuk to have been in the environmental design program and master's program here at the U of M. I haven't confirmed this yet, but having family across the Arctic and urban regions, I've yet to hear of anyone in the educational or professional realm of architecture. And also, it's really common for Inuit to know other Inuit, just by word of mouth. So here are just a few facts to get started. The term Inuit Nunangat, represented in blue, describes the homeland of Inuit, with about 53 communities spread across Canada with 4 main regions called Inuvialuit, Nunavut, Nunavik, and Nunatsiavut. I just recently got back from a conference last night in Montreal, and So some of the stats have changed a bit. So I have here 65,000 Inuit in Canada. It's gone up a little bit, but we'll just stick with those numbers. And a quarter live outside of Inuit-Nunavut borders, and the largest urban population being in Ottawa. Those have kind of changed a bit, so it's actually about 40% of the large number of Inuit living outside of Inuit-Nunavut borders. And it was once Ottawa, but actually it's now Newfoundland and Labrador, which is really interesting. So Inuit-Nunavut encompasses 35% of Canada's landmass and 50% of the coastlines. There are relatives stretching across from Alaska, Greenland to Russia. We're all circumpolar peoples who are all somewhat related but very different. We are the largest Indigenous landholders in the world, it is said, and Canadian Inuit are the largest non-crown landowners in Canada with territorial federal government. And Inuit are proud to participate in the resource management, discussion making, and environmental assessments relating to land, water management, and resource management in Canada. So as the only Inuit family in the neighborhood and elementary school growing up on Treaty 1 territory and homeland of the Métis Nation, I attended after-class gatherings about First Nations and Métis lessons as an Indigenous initiative. And as beautiful as the cultures are, and having a bit of Métis and First Nation blood on my dad's side, I never really understood the difference between Inuit and First Nation when I was younger, as I was told that they were similar, and that kind of confused myself even more. So I knew my family up north did not make teepees and smudge, and their meat was caribou, Arctic char, matuk, and seal. So I've always kind of struggled with my identity at a young age, and I'm sure other urban and non-urban Indigenous people can relate. I visited my family in Chesterfield Inlet and Rankin Inlet in grade 3 for the summer with my mom, and I think it changed my perspective indefinitely and caused me to start asking myself questions pretty profound for the average 9-year-old. I was in culture shock of my own culture because I finally started taking grasp of how different parts of Canada are, and that I wasn't familiar with where I came from as I thought I was. Why was our community set up in wooden box houses when there's no trees in sight? And how does everyone in the community and surrounding community know each other when I don't even know my own neighbors at home? And why am I the only Inuk family in this school? So I just want to point out that's my mom with my brother, my older brother, and that's my dad. So moving forward, I transitioned well into the urban life, and I want to say excelled in high school. I took all the sciences, biology, chemistry, physics, and I took pre-calculus because I wanted to keep my options open, and I was also aware of the educational options I was exposed to, and I wanted to learn as much as I could. Art class was also a course I took because it was my best course, and I genuinely enjoyed it, and the only thing missing was my connection to my culture, such as language, country food, and Inuit customs interacting. And it wasn't until heading into university that I became aware once again that I still don't know where I really came from. And around the same time, I decided to pursue the environmental design program, as I believed it meshed well with my technical and artistic skills as well. So I noticed again in university that the Inuit population was quite sparse, and heading into the Faculty of Architecture, there seemed to be no representation as well. Now being part of the design community for a few years and having a stronger presence with the urban Inuit community, I've noticed gaps between architectural education and Inuit people, which has led me to ask myself even more questions. So why is there a disconnection between architectural education and opportunity to express and realize the potential architecture has on the built environment in the North? The educational differences in Indigenous communities compared to urban settings is a topic within itself. But why are Inuit an anomaly when it comes to architectural practice? Their building practices, along with Indigenous communities, were engraved within their tradition and were ultimately the most efficient and sustainable practices for the built environment in their region. Homelessness and housing crisis seem to be never existent based off of oral tradition and storytelling from elders. So currently there is only an architecture association for the Northwest Territories, and with reason, I mean there's the population of people in general through the Yukon, Northwest Territories, and Nunavut vary. But I wonder about the process of projects in the Arctic and how effective these consultations are for the Inuit and Northern communities. For practicing in the Yukon, they state, Questions related to practice of architecture in the Yukon should be forwarded to the Yukon government's Department of Highways and Public Works. And for practicing in Nunavut, questions related to practice of architecture in Nunavut should be forwarded to Nunavut government's Department of Community and Government Services. Now these are through territorial and federal processes and many others, which I admit I still need to do research on. But I started to get curious about these processes and wonder again how they can compare and contrast to other parts of Inuit Nunangat. And for Nunavik in northern Quebec and Nunatsiavut in northern Labrador, what's their provincial legislation approach to Inuit Nunangat regions in their province? And I wonder about the potentials to integrate design standards in the northern regions. And I also wonder about the architecture and engineering firms who submit their proposals to northern projects. What does their firm stand for, and how do they approach their challenges of the project to the Arctic? And what is their interaction between northern people, Inuit, and designers? How much intention of betterment of the community is really there? Do they understand the standard of cultural living is not comparable to their southern westernized way of life? And how is this made aware through their southern westernized process of design and construction? So through these modern day processes and highly fast-paced expansion, specialization, architecture, engineering, construction, business, it's become extremely complicated to construct. Specifically speaking, in a northern context, it's crucial to understand its complex process of building and infrastructure development. Canada's north is rich in natural resources, and it obtains large mineral deposits such as diamonds, gold, base metals, silvers, copper, and many more. And it's said about a quarter of the country's discovered oil and gas resources are in the north. It's a hot topic right now as well, as we see in the news with the wetsuit and protests. So what is the territorial and federal government's approach to ensure reconciliation and environmental sustainability is kept true? And how can policies of architecture and infrastructure development assist in this? And how is Inuit autonomy defined and defended? So northern Canada is known for its harsh and fragile climate. It's a canary in the coal mine for climate change. As temperatures rise, permafrost is melting, causing detrimental effect to landscape and foundations of buildings. It's currently extremely complicated and expensive for construction and infrastructure, as well as food and general transportation of goods. Again, the price of living in the north is another topic within itself, but these challenges should be approached strategically to become an integral mission towards the betterment of the Arctic and the people who live to maintain it. The needs for architectural and infrastructure education is needed more than ever, and the Inuit who have resided on the land for thousands of years need to become the forefront of these battling issues. So this is just the beginning of my wonders and my curiosity, and I'm aware there's still a lot of research to do, but I believe it is my chance that I'm here today. I feel like I've gone through this process of losing my connection to culture to rediscover it through the process of design and architecture, in order to integrate it and promote it in a culturally relevant way to Inuit people. Part of that is to allow the integration of Inuit 𝗣𝗲𝗀𝗀𝗀𝗀𝗀𝗀𝗀𝗀𝗀𝗀𝗀𝗀𝗀𝗀𝗀𝗀𝗀𝗀𝗀𝗀𝗀𝗀𝗀𝗀𝗀𝗀𝗀𝗀𝗀𝗀𝗀𝗀𝗀𝗀𝗀𝗀𝗀𝗀𝗀𝗀𝗀𝗀𝗀𝗀𝗀𝗀𝗀𝗀𝗀𝗀𝗀𝗀𝗀𝗀𝗀𝗀𝗀𝗀𝗀𝗀𝗀𝗀𝗀𝗀𝗀𝗀𝗀𝗀𝗀𝗀𝗀𝗀𝗀𝗀𝗀𝗀𝗀𝗀𝗀𝗀𝗀𝗀𝗀𝗀𝗀𝗀𝗀𝗀𝗀𝗀𝗀𝗀𝗀 have always been known. So I hope to be a part of a movement that brings forth the environmental and architectural aspects to Arctic infrastructure and to inspire youth to do so as well. Thank you.
Thank you, Nicole. So the final presenter is Cheyenne Thomas. Cheyenne is an Anishinaabe from Peguis First Nation and an architectural designer. She completed the environmental design program here at the University of Manitoba in 2013. She is a member of the RIIC Indigenous Task Force and a board member of the Forks North Portage Partnership.
Hello. I'm from Peguis, like she said. I just wanted to start by thanking all my sisters, Danielle, Reanna, 𝗣𝗲𝗀𝗃. We're all like this together, and it means a lot for them to sing in this room, because I went through the faculty probably in 2013, and I was the only like Native girl that I seen anywhere. Everyone thought I was Latina, so it was like, my best friend for 2 years thought I was like Latina, and I was like, oh my God, like this is whatever. Like and as Indigenous people, we deal with all this trauma, and it's in our bodies, you know. And my father, he's in architecture too, and he went through the faculty, He was a banker for 8 years, and he just decided I got to do something bigger. So he took drafting at Red River, and then I remember like laying under his studio in the other architecture building, and just like, what is he doing? Why is he showing me these little models and stuff? And I got through high school, and I don't know why I excelled at all the arts and creative courses and stuff, and then I got an architecture, and he's like, oh my God, he's like, what are you doing? And but it was like it was easier for me than anything else. So when I was in my studio in education too, I would just look at his building. He helped design with the Aboriginal house that over there, right? And I was like, oh, like he did that so easy, so I think I can do it, like draw and stuff. So my granny was in residential school. She went through nursing, and there's this magic. I mean, I kind of like don't really care anymore about a lot of things, like cutthroat about like what life means. And she figured out how, like what you're saying with what you say, like about how we're adaptable, and what is architecture? Like, what is it? Because I'm curious to know how you say that in Ojibway, you know, because we had to design our whole lives to be adaptable. And you talked about movable houses on the water. I mean, we've done that for thousands of years. Like the story from Ryan, how we've migrated from Ontario, the borders of this whole country, right? So for me, I don't know. Sit in the board meetings, I hear people talk about land, tossing around, how much money you can make. Like, it doesn't matter, right? It doesn't matter about the money. It doesn't matter about all that stuff. Architecture, spiritually, our people have been designing spiritual architecture in these terms for like thousands of years. We're sensitive to like our environment and everything. And I just want to keep it short, but like, yeah, I'm from 𝗣𝗲𝗀𝗄. We're hosting hometown hockey on Sunday. And all I'm going to say, I'll say everything over there.
Thank you, Cheyenne. I think we're going to get started on the panel discussion now. Okay, I guess to start off, I would like to thank each one of you for providing your insight, and we all see you as a role model in this community, and we're really grateful to have all of you here because each of you have been part of our life in some way, and really grateful to have each one of you be part of this discussion. To start us off, I think the first question would be, how can the professional and academic architecture community take steps to build a better reciprocal relationship with Indigenous communities and with the Indigenous designers and students? And anyone can start us off here, maybe Ryan.
David? No, I was kidding. That's a long question. But what I picked up from there was, how do we create stronger relationships? I think it's really important to give true agency to Indigenous people within the realm, whether it's working with a community or whether it's collaborating with an Indigenous architect, designer, to make space for them to be able to express themselves, for timeframes to reflect what's necessary in order to engage properly, as Roxanne was pointing out, and to, I guess, tread lightly, take it slowly, and not be so forceful about trying to integrate things in terms of indigeneity. Really take your cues from the people that you're working with. They're the leaders, so.
Roxanne, did you have any insight?
Yes, I can add to that. First of all, I just want to give a shout out to my daughter. I brought her here with me today. She's 9. She's skipping out today. Her name is 𝗍𝗶𝗀𝗍𝗀𝗿𝘀. So cute. I thought she was gonna come say hello. Okay, well, just to add to that comment, I wanted to share my experience of being a judging panelist for the First Nation Housing Ideas Competition. And what an experience to be a part of. And I was really glad to be invited to sit on that panel because what I brought to the table was the First Nation, the Indigenous experience of someone living in community, in a First Nation community. I've seen the real life of living in a First Nations housing. We all know we're all in First Nations. We're in a housing crisis. Even in my house, I just had it inspected recently, and it's not in good shape, but we're working hard to address those issues within our community and across Canada. And one of the submissions that actually placed second was a submission from someone from, I want to say U of M, but his was completely community engaged based. Sustainability within the community, talking with the elders, using the local resources. It all was community first coming out. And that really touched me here because that's the kind of partnership and relationship we want with architectures or any business or company coming in the community, so that plays a huge impact in the success of overall projects. Thank you.
I think, can you hear me? Okay. I think the biggest thing is to begin to truly understand the land that you live on. Wherever you were born, or whenever you go back to your homelands, wherever that may be, spend that time understanding everything about that land. Today's world is so disconnected that people look to those who understand the land as ecologists or environmentalists or biologists, and whereas our people, everyone had to have that understanding. Everybody had to live their 𝗍𝗲𝗄𝗃𝗃𝗃, that's what I'm talking about, that inheritance. So wherever it is you're calling home, if you want to call that home, you got to understand that land. So what does that mean to how you develop things, how you design things? And once you understand that land, those relationships will develop with Indigenous communities because everything that we are is literally directly tied to that land. The language, it's all formulated from the land. Everything with regards to our governance comes from the land. We use natural law, so our laws can't be changed or recreated by man. Our laws come from our mothers, our Mother Earth. So they're hardened laws. They're laws that focus on protecting the ecosystem. So those are the things that I think will help develop those relationships, is just understanding your homelands. Where is it you were born? And if you're in close to the Indigenous reserves, so they put us on reserves, understand the land around there because that's the land of those people. And that's how you start to develop those relationships to really truly see why it is we protect what we protect. Thanks.
I think I really second what Brett was saying. I think if we're thinking about maybe our institutions, our architecture schools, especially for folks who are not from those lands or visitors on those lands, I think there's a responsibility, to do the homework, to understand how you came to be in that place, how settlement came to be in that place, understanding, the Indigenous peoples from that place and their relationship to that land and respecting that. And maybe in some cases that means leaving room for that and not being involved. Kind of on a very practical level, I think architecture schools could start to maybe do a kind of deep site analysis of the places where they are. The project I'm working on that I mentioned, Nookham's House, we we've kind of been figuring things out as we've gone because it's been kind of a fast-paced project in some ways, but we're also hoping to do some research work on what we've called decolonizing place narratives in Guelph. And in Guelph, a lot of us who are working on this project were Indigenous peoples, but we're Indigenous peoples from elsewhere, and not from that particular land. So there's a learning process there as well to understand what that means. And of course, we are working closely with, in this case, it's the Mississaugas, to kind of figure out what that relationship to land there looks like. So yeah, I think architecture schools have homework to do, and to really frame that context from a decolonial lens, and to really look at the land and to build that relationship with the land and the peoples of that land.
I think the topic of pan-indigeneity comes to mind as well, and how pan-indigeneity is a double-edged sword in a way, and can arise a lot of issues. On one end, it's great to have Indigenous communities overall in Canada and throughout the world come together and talk about and resolve trending issues and show support and have the general equality, human rights being noticed. But on the other end, for me to speak through that experience, it's very difficult to gain some sort of governance or sovereignty, especially in an urban context. For myself, growing up completely outside of Inuit Nunangat, I've almost been taken out through that connection to my northern ancestry and heritage, because there's policies that I can't access. There's opportunities I can't access through policies of not living in Inuit Nunangat for the past 12 months, and that makes me ineligible to have that access to my own culture. So what does that mean for me when myself and also the other 40% of urban Inuit living across Canada, where do we find that space? And yes, pan-indigeneity in terms of the general acceptance of Indigenous culture is great, but also I think designers need to realize and come to terms with that it doesn't necessarily apply to everyone. And I've noticed that like sticking on an igloo or on a logo or in an 𝗠ście🗱🗲 doesn't necessarily mean there's support for the urban Inuit culturally. And I think that can be related to like metaphorically in other Indigenous cultures as well. But it's also very hard to ask for that space when it's not even your own territorial lands. So just having more awareness of that, and I'm just trying to speak in the most humble way about it too, because it is an odd topic to talk about and ask to be gifted that space to wish for, I guess.
I have this like idea about northern communities up north or anywhere, like in the Northwest Territories, anywhere with these schools, because the building my dad helped design, it's culture shock when you get into these universities, because you have accents from the reserve and people like treat you different, you know. And I have this idea like with David, he's like satellite schools, ways to have a communication up north. Like for me, I don't think of the school as like, oh, how are we gonna fix it? I think of an Indigenous school where we can have our performing arts, we can have our language, like a wall for every year when there's a powwow, like you walk in and you see it projected on the whole wall and you're reminded of home. In Māori, like in New Zealand, they have Indigenous mapping. So you can always be connected to your homelands and know what's going on in the ceremonies and what time of the year they are. And it's like kind of like, I don't know what that program is, but technology. Like if we have it in our hands, then we can regain control of how we learn things, not in sitting in a concrete building, you know, outside by the land, you know, speaking in our language. We're storytellers. So writing down stuff, like I was never good at that. Like reading stuff, we talk. That's how you learn. So sitting in a room like over there, I just get so anxious. I'm like, oh, this sucks, like all the time. Like my back hurts, like, you know, I don't know.
Yeah. David, would you like to speak more on this topic about the next steps to build a better reciprocal relationship with Indigenous communities, students, and designers?
I'm muted. Sure. I agree with many of the comments made. One of the things I was thinking as I was listening was, and when you're talking about building relationships between people, I guess there's a implication you're talking about sort of non-Indigenous communities and Indigenous communities and building relationships. And, you know, we're sort of in an interesting territory because most non-Indigenous relationships with Indigenous communities have been, in architecture, historically been initialized by business. And so that's a very difficult starting point when your first contact with a community is an RFP response and you're on a business relationship. And I think that has been problematic, inevitable and needed. But so that's just kind of a comment and an observation, and I think that maybe the focus is more to focus on some of the values that are shared. And I was thinking about Brett's comment about giving back to the land and thinking about, you know, that mainstream architecture is moving in a similar direction and finding those common grounds where we can all come together and rally around things like water. You know, that's, I dare anybody in our cities or in our country to say that they don't care about the quality of our water and work together around these issues, these values. I'm doing a journal currently with a professor at Waterloo, Adrian Blackwell, about property, just as questioning what property is. You know, it's this thing we all just take for granted, that property lines are what we build to, and you have setbacks. And not to say we're going to be able to change that in any radical way, but at least keep that in our mind, that when we talk about a property line, what are we actually saying about the land, and that someone actually has an ownership of it, you know, and that what about all the animals in the air and the water and the critters that are part of that land? What about their role in those relationships? So, you know, those are topics that all people are invested in, and property affects everybody. So I think for me, it's really about seeking out what we share as values, come together around those values and rally around them. And for me, that's a more productive path than, you know, sort of this conversation of, well, who should be involved in this topic? It's Indigenous people only, and you know, because I think that's important too. As I said earlier, I think that there are aspects that should be Indigenous-led and need to be Indigenous-led and to be respectful of communities. But we can rally around things that we all agree on, and for me, that's the best relationship builder.
Thank you. I guess I'll ask one more question, then we will open it up to questions from the audience. So you have all been super inspiring and have paved the way for younger designers and students. What are some of the next steps as Indigenous and non-Indigenous students we can take to build better relationships?
I'll just go first, just as I just want to get it out of the way. No, I just had a thought. I don't want to lose this thought. What Nicole was talking about, the pan-indigeneity, like that's one of the biggest things that we battle here in Canada, because the government lumped us all together into this big ball of whatever. But that's not what we are. And so creating relationships for students is to look at through a different lens, because you're the ones who are going to be shaping this future. You're the ones who are going to be changing the policies in the future. You know, the changes don't come from us. The system has been imposed upon us. The changes have to come from the people who are living here now. And they have to hold their own government accountable when it comes to looking at us through that lens. Like I said before, I'm 𝗣𝗍𝗍𝗍𝗍. I'm married to an Ojibway woman from these territories. So living here, it's living on different land, and I am an immigrant to this land. That's how we look at it. Even though most Canadian people are like, oh, I'm just living on the other side of Canada, I'm still Canadian. Like, that's not how we look at it. So I have to learn about the territories here. I go to ceremony here, I learn how they ceremony here. I spend time on the land here. That is what our responsibility is. And for my kids, that's the responsibility I owe them, because everything goes through the mother, not the father. And that's the other big thing too, is I think a lot of young men need to learn how to be better men. They need to get rid of their egos, and they need to have more women leadership in everything that we do. There's too much pride and ego in everything that men do. Not to say that there aren't good men out there, but I do get tired of seeing men on panels. I'm very honored to be in the presence of the women here who are speaking, and that is my honor. It's not a privilege. And those are the things that I think young people need to kind of look forward to in changing that dynamic. We were just at Adaptation 2020, which is a national adaptation conference in Vancouver this past week. It was an amazing conference. I wish there were more architects there. I think there was only a little spattering of architects there. Actually, I think there's only one. He came and talked to me after, and I was explaining to him the work that we were doing with the programs here, and he thought that was amazing. But, you know, what I saw at that conference was a lot of female leadership. Because climate change and defending the land, I guess for me, I see it as a nurturing behavior, and the mothers of that land are starting to take those roles back. And I really love that. I love seeing more of the female scientists and environmentalists there, so that was really great. So I think that's kind of perspective I'd like to kind of share. I usually try to push that narrative all the time. It's even in my books. I push that narrative of returning to our matrilineal teachings, as that way we'll have a less ego-driven, less power-driven world in the future. So that's my 2 bits.
Well said. I just wanted to say, when we're talking about what's the next step in developing that relationship, it's simple. Just sit down and start the dialogue for that conversation. A two-way conversation between two people wanting to achieve the end goal at the end of the day. That's how you start developing those relationships.
Maybe I'll just add that I think if we're looking specifically at youth and students, I find myself, maybe it's worse with the younger generations, but I often fall into the trap of spending more time looking at images of the land than I actually do on the land. And I think in our education systems, and I think there should be more work to actually get us out on the land, like working with materials, working with our hands, engaging physically, because there's knowledge that's created through that process, and relationships are being built, physically. So I just wanted to add that.
I think, yes, dialogue is very important, and realizing that, or having to practice the opportunities within challenges, whether that's through administrative, cultural, geographic, social, and infrastructure barriers, and just continuing the conversation of opportunities in a positive way rather than negative.
You guys basically said it all, but just like taking time. Our project this in Wayne Park took 2 years to consult with like the elders and the youth, but like in the school system, like understanding where the different students come from, their background, because when I tried to introduce a project about 𝗣𝗲𝗀𝗀 to one of my professors, I remember it was like, I just gave it up because it is like, he doesn't get it. Like, you know, figure out the language. Like, it'd be cool to have a map on the wall of the students and where they come from, like, and having an acknowledgement of what's in this school for the students, for Indigenous people, because, yeah, like, you need to feel like you belong in the space. That's why everyone loves that building, because it's our language around the circle. And yeah.
Actually, if I could just add one more thing, sorry. I also just want to say that, I mean, myself, my mom was a refugee from Vietnam, and I know, of course, so many of us are from different places, from elsewhere, not from this continent. And I think there's also, maybe echoing what David was saying about kind of rallying around common values. I think we need to make sure we're also inclusive of, you know, of the other cultures who have come here and who also often carry their own colonial baggage. And recognizing that we all have kind of unique relationships with land and that those can come together in these places.
And David, if you have anything to say.
Sorry, I keep muting myself. An elder here at the school, and I've shared this, you heard me say this before, he shared, I think, a very powerful teaching with our students, Indigenous and non, which was, they were struggling with how to approach a design project, and he sat down one by one with them, and he kept asking them, what grounds you as a person before you even start designing? Who are you as a person? What grounds you? And I got to say, it was quite, it kind of stumped every student for about a day, because they had to sit back and reflect on who they are and where they're from. And it's come up a few times, but I think that's really important message for students, is that architecture is a field that has often uprooted, let's say, students from their backgrounds to create this kind of monoculture of the architect. And I think the future, what I'm seeing in the younger generation, including all of you inspiring students in front of me on my screen, is that, you know, keeping that 1 foot always firmly grounded in your ancestors and your languages. And even if you weren't brought up to that, like, to see the languages being taught by young architecture students and you know, singing and doing ceremony. And I think that is a really optimistic future for us moving forward, is to keep that foot grounded. Don't let anybody move that foot, but, you know, don't be afraid to explore. And I just always think, you know, it's important for you to learn about Louis Kahn or all these other great architects of the world, but, you know, that needs to be balanced with studying who you are and your roots and your languages and spending time with your elders. And if you do that, then that's where I think those special things are going to happen.
Thank you. So we're going to open up questions and discussion to the audience. So if anyone has questions, please raise your hand. Okay, I'll go.
I'll speak up. I've got several questions I'd like to ask, but I'll kind of pick my favorite. Okay. I have several questions to ask, but I'll kind of pick the favorite based on what you've talked about. I'm curious about the question about language of architecture and how that relates, but the question I'll ask is about symbology in architecture and decoration versus use, especially some of Ryan's work, where it really brings in the spirit of a place in a way that I'm not comfortable in bringing in a description of our Human Rights Museum, which is a dove wrapped around a pile of bricks or something that's kind of strange. But there's something truthful about the symbology that's happening in some of the work that I can't do. Maybe you can talk about the panel is symbology in architecture, decoration, and use.
Yeah, I mean, there's always this question in architecture whether you're providing a decal or a decoration versus an integrated thought. And you know, there's often judgments on architects for making things appear literal, and in some cases it's appropriate, in other cases it might be a stretch or it might be tokenism. But I mean, a lot of what we have done has been shared with us with the elders. And for us, we haven't seen those symbols in our daily lives, so why wouldn't we want to express them, bring them out, and remind people about that there are stories and histories here that are greater than all of us, that are longer, and to share those things. So, really it goes to the elders and to the communities. Some communities are more sensitive about sharing some of their symbologies. Others are more free. So everyone's at a different point, and you have to check in with those communities, and trying to we're also not static, right? There are new symbols, there are new ways that we're trying to bring out, and that's very exciting. So I guess it's an active thread that we're continuing to pursue. Yeah.
Just speaking to some of the symbology, a lot of the West Coast form line art is used quite often to commemorate territories in the West, but a lot of it is not understood. It's just looked upon, and I always hear these really crazy terms like I'm at the top of a totem pole. Again, that's a patriarchal perspective of what a totem pole is. They automatically think being at the top is the best, just like it is with any other electoral system. They're always fighting for power. But the truth of the totem pole, I hate calling it totem pole, but the truth of that carving is that the bottom is the most important, because it's the foundation that's connected to the earth and it holds everything else above it. So chiefs would often put themselves at the top. And this again was that misinterpretation of the Eurocentric perspective of governance. They're like, oh, chiefs must rule over all these people. Like, no, chiefs don't rule over the people. Chiefs are the people who enact the decisions of the decision makers, who are your matriarchs and your leaders and your educated people. And so when they put themselves at the top of the totem pole, they're showing that they don't view themselves as being the thing that holds everyone up. They're held up by everyone else. And so thinking of symbology in that way, it is always good to spend time with the elders, spend time with the people who are educated about their symbolism when incorporating small elements, even if they're the most simple elements. Understand where those come from, understand what they truly mean, and how that impacts people. And the reason that when we would build our longhouses, sometimes you'd have a pole at the entrance, and that was to symbolize that the people who enter that place are the ones who make it, the home. So entrance to buildings were very important to show that you are valued as people. So they were also symbols of making people feel like they are on their own paths, their own homes. Like there's no one that stands above you and looking down on you. So symbolism is more about appreciating the land as well. You'll find that we rarely ever put pictures of ourselves. We're always commemorating the beings that keep us alive. I'd never want to see myself in a statue anywhere, because that's just weird. So just thinking about things that way, I think, is a good reference to symbology, is just, again, spending the time with people who will give you those teachings.
Oh, David, would you like to say something?
Yeah, I just wanted to add, I think that was a really great answer that was just given, and I think that all cultures have their own set of symbols, and I think the important point there was this, that the idea of the sign and then what it signifies. I mean, there's a whole philosophy around this, and that, it'd be note that there's an ownership to the use of those symbols that is important, because there's a tendency to think of symbols or symbology in only visual terms. But they're not about the visuality of the thing. It's about the story behind it and what it means. So, you could just think in other cultures of taking their symbols and using them inappropriately just because you like the way they look. So that, for me, that's why this keeps coming up in the media and things, is because of cultural appropriation, because it's a system of language. So they're very important and in many cases sacred.
Hi. Thank you so much for this panel discussion. It's really awesome. I am an Anishinaabe and Dakota student here in this faculty, currently doing my third year in my undergrad. I guess this is just more question for those that are like practicing in the field at the moment. I was just wanting to know if there are any obstacles or anything that you think are hardships practicing and being Indigenous that you would like to let other Indigenous students know about, or advice for us as Indigenous students that are practicing, or are learning?
I'd say, just as even a woman, but as an Indigenous woman in a room full of men talking all the time over you is really annoying. So like I kind of just say what I have to say and then I don't say anything. But like for sure you have to speak up and you have to know, like, I love what he said, because we're matriarchs, you know, we're the life givers of everyone. So being in a room full of men that egos, my God, it's so like annoying. So I don't know, that's just one thing. When I'm working, I have to like know what I'm saying, you know. You gotta be like cutthroat, like say what you need to say and take power over the situation, you know.
Yeah, I mean, I would say, you know, not being afraid to assert yourself, not being afraid to question others in terms of what they're asking of you, not being afraid of saying no, to say that's not appropriate, to say, you know, we have to, some of us aren't in a position to be able to speak up because, you know, our voices have been so put down over the years, you know, because of history. So, you know, questioning people, you know, calling people on their passive, you know, racist things. People need to be called out, but also, you know, I guess when sharing of yourself, you know, don't just be true to yourself, and a lot of those things will help to mitigate some of those, you know, preconceived notions about who we are, where we're at in our reclamation journey as Indigenous people. So, and I guess, yeah, I guess advocating for each other, and trying to, you know, the whole talk about Indigenous females coming up in architecture and other, you know, this is really exciting. You know, architecture has been a male-dominated profession. I mean, our studio alone, there are 5 or 6 Indigenous women as part of our broader studio, and you know, it's really refreshing, and you know, for them to not feel afraid to speak up, to express themselves, to challenge. This is where we need to be. This is, you know, it's not just us as Indigenous people who need to advocate for this. Everybody can advocate for this. You can advocate, where are the Indigenous voices in this? You know, you don't have to, just because you're not Indigenous doesn't mean you can't advocate for those. For us, not replacing our voices, but asking those questions, challenging people in your circles. So.
Is there any other questions?
Thank you. My question is kind of going off of like Nicole's talk and being in a new place and trying to like make home where you are and where you're not on, I guess, your like traditional land. And I guess my question is just to everyone, like, do you think that architecture can create a home in a place that isn't necessarily your original home, or do you think that like someone will always be a visitor in a new place that isn't their territorial land?
That's a good question. I hope so. I mean, just through my experience, I always try to be aware of where I am and who I'm talking to and trying to be respectful because at least in terms of the urban Inuit aspect, there's still associations still trying to obtain core funding for urban Inuit. That's what the whole conference was about while I was at, and I think there needs to be more there needs to be investment and reciprocation of, at least from like the Inuit perspective of the non-urban and urban Inuit context, and just having to be ensured by other Indigenous associations and Indigenous people in general as allies to be a part of the table rather than just, I've noticed a lot of themes of and Inuit, First Nation, Métis, and Inuit, and I think that, I know it's with good intentions, but I think at least me being here, it's a statement to say that I've been displaced from my homelands and don't have that cultural connection, but to be here in the faculty. So, like I said, I always try and be humble about it, but it's also something that I still try to challenge in the best way possible.
Maybe I'll just add something small, but maybe it's also an opportunity to go back to the treaties, to understand, how, well, obviously it's a very complex and fraught history, but I think there is an opportunity for all of us who are not living on our homelands and living elsewhere to go back to the treaties that kind of, laid out a way to share the land. And so if we can educate ourselves on what that means, then I think that's also perhaps a step towards a responsible and respectful way of living in a place that is not our own.
All right, well, maybe to close, I have a question for Reanna and Danielle, which might in a way be a response to two of the questions which have already arisen, which is about how do students support students? And you collectively recently founded an Indigenous Design and Planning Students Association, and you also designed a beautiful logo for that, which is available as a free pin at the table in the lobby. So could you say something about your experience in founding that association and maybe also your discussions around how you decided on the design?
Yeah, so I've had this idea in the back of my head for probably 2 years now. I remember being an undergraduate student and not really seeing much representation within the architecture, anyone that would look like me or talk like me or share the same culture or traditions, and it was really hard to to speak about myself in that way. And it's funny because when I met Naomi and Danielle actually introduced us in September, and it was crazy because we both had like the same ideas and same thoughts, and we just like, I thought about that too, and we were just like so excited about it, and have some other students that feel the same way you did is really important to have. And this association is to provide other Indigenous students with this type of knowledge and also maybe like a safe space for them as well to convey their culture, and really lucky to have Faith in there as well as one of the younger undergrads. And I just really see it as important to have that representation and also to broaden that field of architecture, because a lot of Indigenous students, even in communities, don't have that exposure to architecture. So I think that's all I have to say. Oh yeah, the logo. It was a collective effort. Mackenzie's gone, but Mackenzie Scotchless was actually the one that put the other logo together, and then all of our ideas were a collective effort. And it's to represent the land from the prairies to the Arctic. And the land is something that influences our language, our bodies, our resources that we use in architecture, and it governs everything within our process as well. So it was really important to have the land and those elevations and everything within it.
And I can speak to the students, supporting students. I'm in Sean Bailey's studio right now, and we're working with Shoal Lake 39. And I think this term I've been feeling very supported by the studio and the students, and they're just providing opportunities and creating safe spaces for Indigenous students. They're really listening with open minds and open hearts, and I think that's really all it takes as a student to support other Indigenous students.
I think that's all for now. As like a closing for each one of you, I think if there's any last minute messages or comments that you've had, maybe in a sentence or two that you would like to speak about as like a closing comment, we would love to hear from each of you again. If David, if you would like to start.
I guess I would just say again, congratulations for you guys there at Manitoba and your initiatives, and looking forward to your future work. And I do encourage everybody to give Lisa and others feedback when they are going through this national policy and thinking about the future you guys want to design as young Indigenous architects, and put those words to them, and let's get your input in that document. So I think that's really important. Thank you again, Marcy.
Yeah, I think, you know, it's kind of surreal sitting here, having gone through the program and seeing so many Indigenous faces and people in the faculty that, you know, I can't help but feel encouraged that the future is bright, that it's in good hands, and that happy to support the efforts of Indigenous students, as well as the work that the faculty is doing here at the U of M. And look forward to more conversations. Miigwech.
I just want to say congratulations to you women. Good on you. Keep going, powering through. It's a great thing that you ladies are doing, and I'm just happy to be back here again, sharing some of my knowledge and experience. And I'm always willing to come back anytime. And yeah, great work. Thank you. Miigwech.
Yeah, it's been an honor to be invited to speak on this panel. I've been doing a lot of talking recently. It's amazing for me because I grew up never seeing any other people like me in any forum. I grew up never seeing more than the romanticized Indian portrayed on TV and in the lies they used to tell us in schools. And this is a huge step in the past 10 years. I've really seen a huge interest in knowledge. The people who live in this country are a lot more accepting than their government. The people who live on these lands have more of a desire to learn about the people who are originally from here, more so than their government. So I appreciate it. I appreciate you giving me your time. I appreciate being on this panel with the wonderful ladies and these two powerful men. I appreciate your knowledge that you guys have shared with me. And the people that I do know out in the crowd there, I really appreciate your introduction to this world with me. And for some reason, I have a lot of friends who are architects, and that's a beautiful thing. It's like they all got into architecture at the same time, and then now I'm somehow speaking within this forum. And I'm a writer, but I really appreciate it. It is an honor for me to be able to have your ears for today. I'm just trying to think of it in English. It's the way we would say it in our language is just from our heart. Amaya and 𝗍𝗲𝗀𝗍𝗍𝗀𝗍, thank you all.
I'm really grateful to be here as well among such amazing panelists and to be part of this conversation. And thank you so much to Reanna and Danielle for facilitating this and for all the organizers. Maybe my closing thought would be, maybe there's some way to connect Indigenous students in design and planning across the continent, because I think it's really exciting to have these discussions among other students, and I think I'm excited for where that's going to go. So thank you.
Thank you as well for all your hard work. It's very appreciated, and thank you for giving me the chance to exercise my voice and my perspective, and to just leave off with the idea that it's okay to challenge the conformity of policymaking, and be well aware of the barriers that it can create, regardless if it's intentional or not. So thank you.
Thank you again. It's like super cool because you guys are my friends and you're doing something so amazing. And thank you to the university for having me. I didn't respond to the email, and then I was gotta get back to Winnipeg, so I just think it's awesome. And then having this panel here, just things I wanted to iterate, they just said, so I just kind of it's awesome and happy to be here. Thank you. Miigwech.
Thank you, everybody.
Thank you. In closing, again, we would like to say Kinanaskomitnan Miigwech Marcy Nakomik, and thank you to each of these panels here. Each of you, like I said, have made an impact within us and within our processes, and to everyone that has attended the Nation to Nation conversation, and also David, who sadly couldn't be here. I also have been used to, in previous months or years, connected with David and was excited to meet him as well, but I guess for another time. So it's nice to see this perspective of where everyone has come from within this map and their communities and how that's all connected here today. Over the lunch hour, there will be a slideshow of IDPSA members' students' work. So as you're having lunch, it'd be nice to see the slideshow of images and work that a lot of the members have been doing within the last few years. So we'd like to say, again, Kinanaskomitnan for each of you for being part of this conversation.
Thank you, Reanna.